We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're very fortunate to have with us today KJ Helms, who is the founder and CEO of JOTO PR Disruptors. Thanks for joining us, KJ.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
So KJ is here to talk about greenwashing, which is actually something that's become so pervasive in companies pretty much worldwide now, especially with the emphasis on making sure that everything appears environmental, at least on the surface. So, KJ, would you give our listeners a brief description of what greenwashing is and what kind of rise we've seen in recent years on that?
Yeah, sure. Greenwashing is when you say that you're environmentally sound or safe, and you're not. I mean, that's just really really the gist of it, right? And it's it's been rising 300% in the past, couple of years. And how do we know that? Well, we're super transparent today. We have social media, we have a 24-hour news cycle, and it is harder and harder for companies to spin a message that's not true. It's just going to be found out.
So what are some of the more egregious examples that you can think of regarding a company saying that we're doing this in an environmental way, and it turns out they're basically just not?
Yeah, I mean, they could, say financial firms. It's been, rising very heavily in that. Saying you have an investment fund that is sustainable, right? Or, there's stocks that are environmentally safe that are actually not, right? That's a great example.
It is. And that actually ties in with, I guess, is it called environmental social governance, ESG efforts.
Yes.
Now, with that, there's actually a lot of top-down pushing on that from governments, but it's also being pushed from the side as well. Corporations getting what are called ESG scores. So they're kind of being forced into a position. Now, obviously, they've chosen to take the positions on this, these individual companies, where they're measured, and essentially they get like a social or corporate governance score that can be deleterious to their investment opportunities and even access to finance. So essentially, it seems to me that there's almost a pushing and a pulling of trying to make companies greener, but they're incentivized to at least put out the blurb, even if that blurb's not necessarily true.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say there's no quality control in that process in the sense of being able to back it up, being able to back it up by reports that are not greenwashed by third-party, outside entities. And just an authentic narrative that's, truly communicating what's happening today and possibly even how difficult it is to become green or sustainable and what companies are doing. Maybe companies are not able to be, have that score that they need, but being transparent and communicating what it's taking and what they're doing and, what are the reasons why they're having difficulty with that would be way more transparent and would offer much more help and support than putting out reports saying that they are doing something when they're not, because the backlash is even worse than the report.
That's a really important point, I think. So you've got companies that are desperate to put out this information that they are doing something in terms of fulfilling they're self-appointed, let's be very clear, they're self-appointed environmental goals. And there's a lot of consumers who are looking to more environmentally responsible companies for whatever products or services they go for. And so they set themselves these goals, and then they're trying to bluster their way into saying we're doing something about it. However, I think your point of saying that if the company were to just say, well, this is what we're trying to do and this is where we're going, the consumer would have a much fairer idea of what they're actually getting into when they go into some kind of contractual obligation, whether that's a sale or a service. If they were just promoting, this is what we're trying to do and we haven't achieved it yet, rather than this is what we do.
Yeah, it's so true because you can get into these false narratives of saying you're carbon neutral when you're not, right? Or, garments that are made from sustainable materials when they're not 100% made from sustainable materials, for example, maybe it's only 5%. So it gives this false impression. The problem is not just that it's a lie, but when you communicate over powerful communication channels to the masses, right? The backlash when it is found to be a lie is much more serious. I mean, a lie is never good from person to person, right? But it is deadly in public relations. The backlash is worse. And it even gets on and I'll say this, it even gets on the radar of legislation and government, and that's the last thing you want.
Tell me more about this. How is there legislation? Should there be legislation? And what is particularly happening in that field at the moment?
Well, there are more fines that are happening because of this. Listen, I think America is a country of laws, right. But I can also say this, legislation is slow for a very particular reason. We don't want so many laws that our self-determinism and our freedoms are taken away.
You're preaching to the choir. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so I hesitate to say should there be more legislation or things like that, right? People should actually start applying PR and journalism ethics when they are putting out these reports. Because, again, the backlash is extremely fatal for a company. It causes litigation. It causes, brand evaluation, brand distrust. Companies spend way more handling false narratives that they've put out than if they were just authentic in the first place and had a strategy of how to communicate what they're doing to get to those goals and gain consumer support.
Yeah, it would be a nice position to be in where companies were completely honest about what they were doing. Tell me, what does your organization actually do?
My organization helps disruptive, innovative companies. When I say disruptively innovative, these are companies that have technology mostly, right? But new services or products that are changing the status quo. There's a lot of things today that need to be changed, right? And there's a lot of people out there that are looking to make their industries better, whether it's in finance, whether it's in healthcare, whether it's in retail, whether it's in, you name it, right? And a lot of change needs education. And so what we do is we help companies take a transparent and narrative, we help companies take a narrative stance on being transparent and educating the markets of why change is needed, right? That's what we do.
It seems to me that essentially your outfit is encouraging companies to be honest. Is that it? Is that what I'm getting? I mean, I applaud it, but
I can tell you that a lot of innovators, and it's been a catalyst since COVID, right? COVID came about, and you have a lot of really smart technologists and entrepreneurs and people out there that have said, that's it, right? Like my quality of life, people's quality of life around me needs to improve. I'm no longer okay with lack of healthcare transparency. I'm no longer okay with the broken system in healthcare. I'm no longer okay with, financial illiteracy. And so they are coming out with fantastic technology and services and products that are really changing things for the better. And not to be trite, but they honestly do want to make the world a better place. But with that comes a great amount of responsibility and communication. And people today, they don't want to be greenwashed. They don't want to be snowed. They don't want to be lied to. They are very, cognizant of when they're getting a bunch of fluffy jargon, right? People like raw, genuine authenticity that they want to support.
I believe the saying is that a lie travels halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoelaces, tying up its shoelaces, something along those lines. So with greenwashing, there seems to be an overall thing. People in general, it's greenwashing. Clearly, it's something that's not good. We got that. We've got that. But it's still
misleading. It is really a practice of misleading consumers into believing products, services, or practices are actually environmentally friendly or sustainable.
Yeah,
that's really what it is.
Very much so. And as you rightly pointed out, in an age of social media proliferation, and I would say there's more than 24-hour news cycle in the 24-hour period. But within that, you have such risk of being found out. And it strikes me that we have this idea that ESG, is supposed to be good for a company, whereas that does appear more like an outside force forcing a company to report things that might not be true rather than take action at perhaps a slower pace.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that does put pressure on companies to solve problems. And typically those problems get solved in ways of greenwashing, right? And this is another status quo that needs to be changed, right? There needs to be solutions so that the penalties aren't so great and companies are actually facilitated to get to that point rather than having to greenwash or feeling like they have to, I should say.
I think it was Ronald Reagan who said status quo is Latin for the mess we're in. KJ,
he was so ahead of his time, wasn't he?
Indeed. KJ Helms of JOTO PR Disruptors. Can you tell our listeners where they can follow you and find out more about what you're doing?
You can go to jotopr.com, JOTOPR.com. You can learn about anti-PR, which is the antithesis of the traditional PR. It is the lack of reasonableness, I should say, with fluffy, antiquated messaging that doesn't speak to what's really going on today, and learning how to take control of your narrative in the court of public opinion to educate and to help your own company take control of its narrative.
KJ, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
And that's all we have time for in this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to thank our guest today. Of course, extend my thanks to you, the listeners at home, for taking the time each week to tune in and join us. Please remember, LibertyNation.com does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. Thanks for being here.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.